Hey, Sean. Hello, everyone. The webinar will start in about 5 minutes. Please stand by. Good day, and thank you for everyone joining. Depending on where you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon. Today we will talk about the application lifecycle management, and our speakers are Hennie Vermeulen from SafePaaS and Chawla from Trevera. Just quickly, some housekeeping items before we start. Our session is set up where you can submit questions, which we will cover at the end of the presentation. So as we proceed, please feel free to submit questions. SafePaaS is a software risk management firm with significant experience establishing application security and controls to help organizations minimize and mitigate risk. Risk management solutions is our sole focus, where we have extended our expertise. We do not do ERP implementation consulting. We have also been recognized by several organizations as to our capabilities with a very active leadership presence within the Oracle community, where we attend many conferences such as OAUG, Open World, regional and international events, as is evidenced on this slide. Adil Khan, our CEO, has co-authored a book on GRC for Oracle applications, extending our leadership and knowledge in this area. He also heads up the Oracle GRC SIG. On the right-hand side, you'll see a number of webinars / conferences that we participate in, this with some dates as well. What this gives you is just a reference point for future activity. Also important to note that SafePaaS has been recognized by Gartner as having the most comprehensive GRC solution on the market. SafePaaS is a platform which includes a multitude of modules. This slide represents the SafePaaS product offerings. Although SafePaaS is our company name, it is also the umbrella term used for the 5 major groupings of capabilities within our products. At the bottom layer, we have ArcPaaS, which covers risk and compliance management for SOX, GDPR, and other compliance requirements, helping organizations manage their organizational and operational risk. To the left, above the ArcPaaS, we have AccessPaaS, which addresses access management for ERP applications. This includes iAccess, which is our user provisioning tool, as well as Firefighter ID, which is more of an emergency access request. Next to that, on the right-hand side, we have MonitorPaaS, used for controls, monitoring of configurations, master data, and transaction, looking at various policy violations and questionable transactions. Also, we use transaction monitoring as a means to identify the activities that happened during the Firefighter ID. Above that, we have ProcessPaaS, which is used for process management in order to eliminate errors from out-of-sequence processing of key tasks such as period end close. As we know, a material misstatement may occur if tasks are not followed in the order required. ProcessPaaS provides that capability. Right at the top there, we have SafeSight, which is our predictive analysis used for dashboarding, analytics, and custom reporting. A key capability of the SafePaaS suite is our complete solution, which is built on a common database that benefits our clients' controls framework management. I'm going to turn it over to Chawla from Trevera. Sean, over to you. Sean, you there? Sean, we can't hear you at the moment. Apologies, everyone. We seem to have some technical difficulty. Sean, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yeah, we're just getting a little bit of echo, so.
Yeah, no, for some reason I ran into a technical problem. My apologies. So
No worries. Over to you, man. Take care.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so let me come back here. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to thank everyone for, gosh, what did I, for, so to start again, our organization specializes in the implementation and support services. So one of the reasons that Trevera um, and SafePaaS make a good combination is we're here to help you optimize your applications. So we do everything from implementations to upgrades to onshore managed services, and then we can also help you put your on-premise applications in the cloud. We can do a software development, and then we want to partner with you. I'm having some technical difficulties again.
Hey, Sean, I've switched back to our presentation. So if you want to maybe just talk to that for now, and then we can switch back when you're ready to show.
Yeah, if you want to just get to the next slide, I apologize. This
Sure.
computer messed up. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. So basically, our focus really is to help you with time. Most of our customers have been using the E-Business Suite products or Oracle products for many years. And what's happening is that they're not as efficient, so they're leaving money on the table. And our goal is to help you optimize, modernize through automation, and to put in new features and functions. And also, most businesses have transformed. So really, you're at a position where not really using your applications optimally. So our goal is to come in and help you, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, is improve your cost of goods sold efficiencies, decrease your rework in IT, improve operational efficiency, and then that results in you to be able to focus on your core activities, to focus on your business and become more strategic, and then obviously results in improved customer retention and acquisition. I think with that right now, I'll come back to it later, but Hennie, go ahead and take over, please.
Thank you. So talking about application lifecycle management, ALM is an integrated system of people, processes, and tools. And software development methodology covers waterfall, agile, and DevOps under normal circumstances. What we're saying with ALM is that we're kind of sort of merging some of these methodologies so that we can provide a better fit for our customers. Because what we're finding is that your typical waterfall approach takes way too long to get things done, and then you end up having to go back sometimes to the drawing board at a later point in time. So what you're seeing here on the screen is your typical application implementation methodology. On the left-hand side, you've got your various, typical activities like project management, your business definition requirements, solution development, documentation, knowledge transfer, and ultimately your production transition. And what these various blocks, represent is that each of these activities don't just happen in one place. They're kind of spread across your entire methodology. And so by doing that, it allows us to kind of introduce that agile type capability of, testing earlier on and fixing things and not waiting until the last minute when we're doing UAT to find potential issues. So next we're going to jump right into the E-Business Suite R12 security management. So as you can see from this screen, this is your typical E-Business Suite user provisioning, or shall I say user creation screen, which allows you to create the user and then assign the various responsibilities that you believe he or she should have. ERPs historically have very complex security that is shielded from the end user, as is evident by this screen, because this doesn't get into the intricate details of what does these responsibilities mean, right? So when we say a receivables role, I could literally give that person access to suppliers to create a supplier and create an invoice. And there's no visibility on this screen that I've actually just done that. So it is important, however, to know your risks in terms of SOD. And you will need to know this knowledge or rely on a system like SafePaaS that's going to govern that risk for you. So on the next slide, we're going to get into, on the next slide, we're going to get into the actual security model for Oracle E-Business Suite. Each ERP out there has a model like this. They all look a little bit different because of the specifics around each ERP. But as it pertains to E-Business Suite as an example, as you can see here on the top left, we have user assigning a user being assigned a responsibility, and that responsibility containing multiple menus, which in turn has multiple functions on them, and then ultimately that is presented on a form. So it is important to understand what is this relationship, because ultimately the user to function is what constitutes a violation, not the responsibility. The responsibility in the menu is but merely a pass-through from the user to the actual access point where the potential violation occurs. So as you can see, if you as an end user don't understand this hierarchy and you're able to traverse it and figure out exactly what a user has, you are imposing additional risk on yourself, because the chances are you will not see where there is potential conflicts. So when we talk about key factors for security and testing, we alluded to this earlier on when I showed you the slide of the security model, and that is that, E-Business Suite is a very complex ERP. It is roughly 35,000 functions, which your typical customer will have access. And then of that 35,000, they're grouped into menus constituting roughly about 12,500 menus. So as you can imagine, this is a fairly daunting task for someone to do using, say, a spreadsheet, or just trying to navigate through the application to see what that person has. So that brings me to effective roles design. This is very important to ensure that the roles are designed, and I use roles here interchangeably with roles and responsibilities, because not all customers have necessarily adopted RBAC. But the design of responsibility and role is extremely important to get that right. And this is another area where SafePaaS can be of assistance. We have a roles designer product that allows you to design the roles and then test them against an SOD rule set to ensure that they're not breaking things. User provisioning process end-to-end is also extremely important, because otherwise what happens is people change things on the fly, and it's very difficult to keep track of that. So having a user provisioning process that has a workflow allows for approvals to be exercised before the activity actually happens, in other words, the access being granted, is fundamentally important to ensure that your risk is mitigated. Moving on to the next is our checklist. So what we have done over the years is developed checklists that allows us to ensure that we can verify that you're conforming to all of the various things that needs to happen. What you're seeing here on the screen is just a subset of such a checklist that gives you kind of a flavor of the types of things that we would be looking for. What you may find is that some of the things on the screen you may not be familiar with, or you didn't realize that it needs to be done, so that you can have better control over your system. And Sean is going to talk about, a little bit more in detail about some of the things that you can do on your existing environment that will improve things, be able to leverage more value. When we look at the security violations, what we will find is that for us to be successful in fixing and correcting the defect, we will need to understand exactly what this user has access to. And what I mean exactly, I mean not just the responsibility, but the menu and function makeup, because those things ultimately govern what the user can do. So as you can see in this example, it gets pretty complicated, with menus, having submenus, having functions, and so on and so forth. So, sometimes, you think, well, if I just remove this one function, is that going to take care of the problem? And then if you have the whole picture, you will actually be able to realize that, no, it's actually not going to do that, because the person still has that access. Next, I'm going to move into the EBS R12 configuration management. So in terms of ensuring your configurations in your EBS environment is done right, we put controls over those configurations. So for instance, I've got 3 examples here. Journal authorization limits, right? We want to know when someone changes a limit for journal authorization. And the reason we want to know is because it has a downstream financial impact. And so in most organizations, you will find that this has a higher risk rating as a result of that potential financial impact. Furthermore, the procurement to pay process is especially highlighted due to the occurrence of movement of money in and out of the organization, right? So again, this is a financial impact. And you're going to see most of these configurations that we care about are going to be financial related, right? And the reason those are the main ones is those are the things that most companies are concerned about right off the bat. Now, there are many other configuration controls that can affect things as well. A good example is VAT rate, as an example. If you change the VAT rate, you could either underpay or overpay your government body, which means that you ultimately have a financial impact again. So, again, this is a sample of just 3 controls. We have a catalog of thousands of these configuration controls that we will make available to our customers using our MonitorPaaS product and in conjunction with our DataProbe product. DataProbe is actually used to extract the data out of the ERP, creates a snapshot, which then is consumed by our MonitorPaaS product. The next slide here gets us into, again, a checklist but this time for configuration testing. Again, this gives you a very small sample of, some of the stuff that we've done. Gives you an idea of some of the things that you may want to or should care about. Things that jump out to me are things like, hold unmatched invoice, right? By not having that set to no has an impact. Password lifespan days. If you not have that configured, then, passwords don't expire, and so on and so forth. Next, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean Sean's going to talk to you a little bit about their tools and approach. Sean, over to you.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me right now and also see my screen?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so basically, if you guys have heard, I think most of our customers that we're working with collectively between SafePaaS and Trevera Solutions are really dealing with two issues, right? There's the government risk and compliance concern, and then there is also, well, the business has changed. How do we modernize? How do we automate? There's features and functions because our business has changed, and what do we do? And what's the health of our environment? Is our database been maintained? Is our applications and our operating system doing well? So what Trevera Solutions can do is we've got our own tools, and what we do is we come in, we identify your pain points, we run our own tools that are proprietary and that we've built over time, and with these tools we're in a position where we're able to give you a health check of your environment from a technical perspective and a functional perspective. So if you take a look at one of our tools, this is called TCAT, and what this does is it takes a snapshot and gives us a health perspective on your environment from a database, operating system, and an applications perspective on your memory, your objects, your storage, concurrent management. We also have a tool called Oscar. We also have a functional tool. So when we run our tools against your environment, we're able to ascertain what some of the areas are that are going to be in effect. You'll get a report that's a few hundred pages or 50 pages to a few hundred pages, depending on the complexity and the size of your environment. But what this will do is this will highlight for us areas in your database that require remediation immediately, or areas in your database that may require remediation at a future date and time. So that's going to help you run most efficiently today. We'll be able to also piggyback on some of the stuff that SafePaaS does, which is help you gather reports and statistics on your user count and some of those kind of areas as well. The other area when you're taking a look is there's a lot of pressure today to do more with less. And it's at that point, we also have a functional health check assessment where we will come in and based on all the modules you have, we will ask your business, what are the key pain points per area, per module? What are the new business critical success factors? And what we're able to do is document and get a point in time of how features and functions are being used and what features and functions are not being used and are available to you that will help you with your automation process, help your staff become more productive, and really just make you more efficient so you can focus on strategic stuff. Many of our customers are spending 60 to 80% of their time just firefighting, and how do we transform the organization and get you to a point where you're only firefighting maybe 20 or 30% of your week, and then the rest of the time you're becoming strategic and using new features and functions. So let me get back to the screen side. Can we get to the next slide, because I'm having some technical difficulty here again. Oh, there we go. So we got TCAT and Oscar, which I talked about, and then the health check perspective. So those are some of the tools that will come in. We can do an assessment. The TCAT tool normally takes, a week or two, but we only need access to your system for about 15 minutes. And then the health check, depending on the complexity of your environment, can take anywhere, from 3 to 5 days, but it's a limited time from the customer's perspective. With that being said, I'd like to turn it back over to Hennie.
Okay, thanks. I thought you said you wanted to show some other documents, not?
I did show the other documents. Were the screen not working?
No, I don't think so.
All right, let's try again. I can pull them up.
Let me make you presenter.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. So TCAT was the tool that I was referring to earlier. This is one of our proprietary tools where we'll come in and do the assessment. And this will give us a health check in the point of time, and we're able to identify areas that require remediation. So this is going to tell us, hey, your system needs to be addressed in these areas, and it will also identify to us areas that require remediation in the future. And the other document, which I talked about, which I can show you, is our health check, which is from a functional perspective. We'll come in and ask questions from a functional perspective for each of your functional areas, and that will give us a good understanding of how the applications are being used today and what your pain points are, what features and functions and automation can help you, automate and modernize your environment. So, this is a comprehensive report, and this is what I was showing to the team earlier, and I'm glad you can see the screen here, but really it's just getting into the details of what we can do for each of the areas. And from this, you have a comprehensive plan, which is extensive when you're being able to marry it with the SafePaaS product, because then we're in a position where you can satisfy your governance requirements, and as well as, help with the automation and optimization of how you're using your environments today. So with that, let me turn it over to you, and I apologize for the mishap. Hennie, are you able to? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Just switching back to the screen. Okay, so next we're going to talk about common ALM issues and remediation. So your typical common issues that we run into is, things like, well, when we tested this in our dev and our non-production environment, or UAT, we didn't run into this problem. And now we're in production and it's not working how we expected it to work. And this could very likely be as a result of a potential configuration setup that is different between your non-production and your production environment. Because again, people have access to non-production environments. They have typically higher privileges, system administration rights, etc. So they can change things around. Maybe they're testing something, but they forget to switch it back. And so that could potentially cause, increased costs as you go through these projects. Customizations are lost, and specifically relating to upgrades. Oracle sometimes releases something, they will change an underlying component, and if you've touched that component, your customizations will be overwritten. So it's important to understand what those customizations are, and be able to identify what those changes need to be taken care of. Functionality differences between versions. 11.5.10 as an example, customer upgrades to R12 or R13, and all of a sudden the functionality works differently, right? So if these things are not anticipated ahead of time, these are things that could cause significant pain and cost overruns. Validations that are not done to the auditor or the business, right? Those are key ones. Documentation, the BR100 was out of date. We see this all the time, where BR100's only as good as it was when you created that BR100. Unless you're including the update to the BR100 to be part of your change management process, you will be, the result will be that you will have out-of-date documentation. And that can be catastrophic, because when you're doing an upgrade and you don't know what all the changes or settings are in the BR100, you're not going to be able to test that thing properly. And so you're going to end up putting something in production that will most likely cause you additional overruns. The same applies to when you apply a patch, right? And not fully understanding the full impact of that patch. The downstream effect is pretty significant in terms of resource costs as well as delays in projects, overruns. Missed deployment milestones for rollouts and upgrades. Obviously, that is a big one, right? So we set a project plan together, we expect to get something done in a certain time, and we miss it, right? So now we've got all this additional manual effort that has to happen for us to autocorrect and get back on track. Security access risks. This is another big one. Again, when Oracle applies patches, what you will find is that in many times they will actually change the function makeup in the responsibility. They may change a function from one menu to another, as an example. And so those can cause problems for our customers too, where we see that customers were using seated responsibilities, and now that responsibility has way more access than it may have had before. And that causes potential SOD violations. The next thing here is inconsistent configurations that obviously poses a higher risk. your inconsistencies between instances and ledgers, legal entities. Again, because the fact that you would have to manually set these up, there's a higher likelihood that they were not done the same way. And so you may have ledgers that are set up differently. And so hence they would behave differently. That can also cause major risk in your organization. Prod issues discovered after go live, that's a big one. We find that in a lot of customer environments, during upgrades or enhancements, things are not caught in the stages. And many times it's regression testing things, right? It's not something that was part of the scope of the change, but it had an impact, right? So unless you're doing full regression testing, it's hard to identify these types of things. ERP rollout risks. So here, what's important is, trying to curb the number of SRs that you're creating during the process. We hear it all the time. Well, we'll just create an SR. The problem is an SR may take weeks to get resolved. In many cases, it's something that was done incorrectly. It was either a setup value that was done wrong, or maybe a missing patch. And these things are all related to the fact that you may not have the full picture of where you are now and where you're going. This is an area specifically where Trevera can help with their analysis upfront to be able to highlight some of these things. Process and policy compliance risk. This is where we, have approved process design changes, but they're not actually enabled in the ERP application. So, we're kind of relying on people's ability to enforce the policy and the process, but we're not enforcing it through the ERP itself. And so that then creates a compliance risk for us, because people may not follow the policy. Ultimately, these things, all of these things that we talked about, will result in an audit risk post go live. And so, I think everyone's worst nightmare is they go through an upgrade or enhancement request, and everyone high fives afterwards and goes, man, that was a great project, we're looking good. You get the auditors to come in, and boom, they slap you with a bunch of control weaknesses, and everyone's dumbfounded as to how did that happen. And the main reason here is these things we just talked about, and then furthermore the fact that there's a disjointed process. And this really is where we're talking when we're saying ALM. We're talking about that entire application lifecycle management, right? The processes, the people, the tools, all of those things need to somehow talk to each other, and they need to be cohesive to ensure that things don't fall through the cracks. Now, as it pertains to the cost of these potential ineffective configurations, as we all know, that if we catch things earlier on, we can recover fast, and the cost typically is pretty negligible. However, if we wait until the last minute, or worst case scenario, post go live, right, we find stuff. Now we got to go back all the way to design, review the design, go through a potential mini build, go through a test, now you got to redo a lot of these activities that was previously done already, but because they didn't catch something, it was missed, right? You now incur this additional overhead and cost. So it's resources being tied down, as well as the cost of not having that change in and working correctly. When we talk about software development lifecycle, it is important to point out that ALM, is different than having an SDLC. So an SDLC includes ALM. However, ALM includes SDLC. So what that really means is that SDLC is a subcomponent of the ALM methodology. right? So, where the SDLC typically just covers the pieces from the development effort, right? So you've got changes going into production. So that whole process of planning, designing, build, implement, and that is only one part of the puzzle. Now, to satisfy, COBIT, SDLC alone is not sufficient, because as you can see, we're talking about monitoring and evaluating of performance, internal control. We're talking about managing data, and so on and so forth. So there's a fair amount of things here that isn't covered under your typical SDLC, which is why an ALM makes a lot of sense. So earlier on, I talked about, and I said that, with ALM, we're really kind of sort of looking at a hybrid between your typical waterfall project and an agile methodology. And so the top half of this slide depicts your typical waterfall methodology, right? So you go through requirements. When that's done, you start your design. When that's done, you build, and so on and so forth. And then these things at the bottom here are typically things that really should happen at the same time, but if they're not happening, it can create problems for you down the roads, right? So there's an overlay on your typical SDLC to ensure that all of these various activities that we need to ensure is covered from an application lifecycle management is included in that entire project. So talking about manual approach versus automated approach, the main difference obviously is cost, right? So, when you're talking about manual approach, it typically starts off as, negligible in the beginning, and then ultimately as you move through the cycle, the cost increases, right? Because there's more people involved, more resources, etc. People make mistakes. There's the potential of that happening. But with automated, on the flip side, it's a little bit higher upfront cost, but not significantly. But the cost goes down from there. And that's really, I think, where the key is, right? Is making sure that in the long run, you're not bogged down by doing configuration management, that it is part and parcel of your process. And that is, a key fundamental difference, that it's not done after the fact, because we all know with after the fact things, sometimes when we have to cut down on time, those are the things that get slashed out. So there's a high likelihood that the configuration management will get cut out because it's not part of your process. So next, we're going to quickly take a look at some case studies. The first case study we have here is we have an aerospace and defense business that we assisted with their ALM activities. Their biggest challenges was, their growing cost with complying with regulatory requirements. Further to that, the labor-intensive and error-prone configuration change management process. They had to cross-check everything, dump it out to spreadsheets, compare it. I mean, it was very manual for them. Access policy violations, right? But the important difference here is identified by auditors, right? So they knew they had access policy problems. They fixed that. They thought they were good, went through an audit, and boom, they got slapped. And they realized that the reason in this specific case why that was the scenario is that they were focusing on responsibility. They did not look at that lowest level, the function. And so they didn't catch half of the violations that was identified by the external auditors. The net results here was that, we were able to reduce their misconfiguration errors by roughly 99% by automating it. Furthermore, we identified and remediated 80% of their access violations within 3 months. We lowered their ERP total cost of ownership by reducing the configuration management time and cost by 20%. And then we improved the access controls testing time by providing auditors the access compliance reports, right? So by the auditors relying on the same output that the organization is relying on, there's no rework. And we hear that all the time, where customers are saying, when it comes to audit time, I'm bombarded with all of these questionnaires I got to fill out and provide data extracts and all of that stuff. And it's because the auditors can't rely on what the organization is saying their current state is. On the next one, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sean. You want to talk to these two?
Yep, perfect. So thank you for that. Smile Brands is a customer of ours, and basically they had managed services and an implementation, and their business had changed, and the challenges they were facing were more along the lines of system stability, training issues, features and functions not fully implemented, or since the business had changed, there was new requirements that the system could support, disaster recovery not fully validated. And because it was managed services, our managed services, we did functional, technical, DBA, and operating system support for them. They didn't have the budget to hire all those resources, and it wasn't even justified in the sense that they didn't really need a full-time DBA. So we put all that and stuff together for them. They did have another organization that we replaced, and what ended up happening was we ran our TCAT tool, identified issues in their database, increased their efficiencies, came up with a remediation plan. And that also resulted in an extensive amount of savings because, they needed less space. There was performance issues. They were able to save in the procurement of additional hardware. That being said, over the next 6 months, with no additional cost, the same cost that they were paying another managed services vendor, we were able to train end users, create documentation. We were able to implement new modules and new features and functions. They didn't have cash management, and they receive a lot of checks. So we were able to reconcile 250,000 checks that were with the bank, ended up with data cleansing, implemented new modules and features like iExpenses and cash management, as I discussed. So all these results in automation, modernization, and freeing up their time, their staff to do more with less. Can you get to the next slide, please? Another case study is Zodiac Pools, where we came in and did the health check, sat down with them for a week, and we identified problems in their process. They were having challenges with their inventory and the integration between, with the integration of their inventory. They were planning on a monthly level, and we were able to change some of the processes, change some of the interfaces between Demantra and EBS, and get them to a weekly planning session. And that resulted in millions of dollars of inventory being able to be reduced, and that freed up that money and those funds to be able to allocate it to other initiatives. Also freed up the staff to be able to focus on other initiatives as well. So really, it's inaccurate forecasting, mismatch, and Kanban, which results in tweaking the process, putting in new features and functions, which results in efficiencies, monetary gains, and freeing up capital for other initiatives. That's really a very simple approach to really just getting the maximization of what you already own. So these are some examples. We can get into them in more detail if people are interested offline. But in the interest of time and leaving some time for questions and answers, I think that's basically it. I'll turn it back over to Hennie. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, so we're going to turn it over to Q&A. I think Emma has been fielding our questions. So Emma, over to you. Do you have any questions?
Yes, we have had a few questions come in. First question.
Oh gosh, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Oof, audio is horrible. We can't hear you. Can you maybe just shoot me the questions, then I can I'll pose them. You could just email them to me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that sounds better now. I think you're okay now.
Right, okay. Well, the first question we've been asked, what are the typical types of returns or savings that customers see when you engage?
Is that for SafePaaS or for both of us?
Sean, I think you can answer that one.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. It depends, and it varies from customer to customer, and depends to the level of detail, right? So in some places we're able to come in and do these assessments, and the savings are extensive. There's millions of dollars, and in other cases, it just depends, right? So it's kind of a loaded question. I think it varies from customer to customer, but obviously there are extensive returns. We've yet to go to a customer where there wasn't some sort of compliance issues or gaps that needed to be remediated that put the company at risk from audit and even monetary issues from arising, as well as operational efficiencies. Businesses transform and change on, quarterly, sometimes yearly, and so there's so much to be gained. But you have to explore it, and you have to be open, to see the possibilities of what else can be done. And so, yeah, there's many case studies where we've saved customers extensive time and millions of dollars, and that adds and compounds it because it's year after year, right?
Okay, thanks for that. We have another question in for SafePaaS. Hennie, we are planning to move to a cloud solution with the understanding that the vendor is managing the updates and care. So why would we need ALM anyway?
Yeah, I think it's a common misconception, right? The fact that, yes, the vendor is taking care of those things, but there's a number of other things that the vendor is not going to take care of. So as an example, if a company sends out invoices for all deliveries, those invoices are not monitored by the cloud service provider. So you as the customer, becomes responsible for that activity to ensure that, you have control over it. So this is more of a business process management task as opposed to a technology issue. It comes back full circle to when we started off. We said ALM is people, process, tools, right? So if you look at ALM, yes, it absolutely provides, it's important. Updates are being tested by the cloud provider for technical correctness, but not from, or whether or not they support the customer's business. Right, so these things all remain the customer's obligation. There is a fair amount of stuff that the customer still is going to have to do, and so they're not completely off the hook as it pertains to that.
Okay, thanks for that, Hennie. And another one for you, Sean. How is your approach different than other vendors?
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a good question. I think what we do is take a holistic and a root cause analysis type of approach, right? So when you have a very senior team, and before we start any engagement, what we want to do is get into the details of how the system is being used and what the pain points are. And then what ends up happening is, especially in the managed services size or during an upgrade, our main goal is to address root cause remediation. What happens with a lot of other organizations in, when they're doing managed services, you're actually in a position where they're fixing the same problem over and over again. And our goal is to say, okay, how do we fix and remediate this problem so it doesn't occur again? And with time, that frees up the team. If you've rectified a situation at the root cause, then you don't have to deal with that again. And then it frees time to do other initiatives and add other features and functions. When you have tools that tell you where your hot points are, or where the database, where the operating system's at risk, you're able to remediate those. And then that results in possibly not having to procure new hardware. Every time you make copies, you have less space, you're more efficient, and then you have a plan on what needs, what your business is creating in terms of data, and what needs to be pruned on a regular basis so that it's always running as efficiently, as smoothly as possible. So, the difference is just doing the homework and doing the analysis, getting the details, and then having a plan of continuous improvement on a monthly basis, or for the project if it's an upgrade or acquisition integration.
Okay, and the last one we have today, I guess this one can be for you, Hennie. We have other third-party applications, so how does this solution address this?
Yeah, thank you, Emma. So, SafePaaS solution is a heterogeneous solution. Our platform allows us to very easily configure any additional connections that's required. So any third-party application, be it custom developed or whether it's some ERP that if you look at the existing slide on the screen, the Q&A slide, the image that's being depicted there is of our existing connection. So if, let's say, for instance, you're using something that's not on here, let's take, I don't know, whatever, let's say application A, right? And then application A, you will be able to configure, well, we will, as SafePaaS, we will configure that for you. There is a small charge for that, but nothing significant. And then you will be able to consume it as you would any other ERP. Because the only thing that's really different is that connection to the source system. Once the data is pulled into our SafePaaS platform, it is denormalized, and it doesn't really matter where the ERP data comes from. We make sense out of it.
Okay, thanks for that, Hennie. Well, I think that brings us to the end of all the questions we've been asked today. So thank you, Hennie, and thank you very much, Sean, for joining us today. We hope you've all enjoyed today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at our monthly webinar in April. Please feel free to get in touch with either myself, Hennie, or Sean at Trevera to discuss what you've seen today in today's webinar in more detail. You can find us all on LinkedIn or on our websites. So thank you all for attending, and until next time. Thank you and bye-bye.